Hello, my name is Elisha Rosenzweig, and welcome to my podcast. This is the first episode that I'm recording, and I haven't yet decided what to call it, in part because the thing I'm going to talk about is still in flux, and it's a little bit hard to predict in advance what will be a suitable name. But by the time you're hearing this, I will have probably chosen something, so I'm sure it will be really, really good. What is this podcast about, and why am I doing this? So, I think the best way to explain that is to tell you the date and time and location, that is, of where I'm doing this podcast. And I live in Israel. I'm in the center of Israel, and the date is October 16th, 2023. What that means is that about 10 days ago, Hamas unleashed an insanely brutal terror attack on Israel, murdering about 1,300 people, at least I'd say 1,000 of them civilians, maybe more. I haven't checked the latest tally and the division between civilians and armed forces. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, you're probably listening to this in the future and not in the present, when we are living today. And being in Israel at this time is not just a difficult time, and definitely part of the reason why I'm recording this is because I process things the most by storytelling, by telling what is happening, and this story needs to be told. And not just because I'm trying to maintain my sanity with all the crazy deluge of information that is just, flowing through social networks and such intense conversations, so much vitriol and hate and all that negativity, that I figured this would be a better medium to sort of work through what it is that we are going through here, that I'm going through here, but also because I feel that we are in a pivotal moment in history, at least for Israel, and I believe for the world, but definitely for Israel. And I think I'll give a little bit of context for that, just so you understand why I'm saying that. You see, these horrendous terror attacks did not just come in the middle of any period in Israel's history. For the past several years, we've been dealing with, I guess, what you can call a constitutional crisis, and a crisis of leadership, and a whole bunch of things happening at the same time. Up until 2 weeks ago, before these horrendous attacks took place, we were deep in a national debate, but really packed with a lot of emotion about the right division of power between the different branches of government. And there was a lot of tension between religious and non-religious people, and a whole bunch of things going on. Really a perfect storm. The feeling was that, society was sort of starting to tear at the seams, so to speak. And I'm sorry if I butchered that phrase. And while most people believed that we would get through it and figure out a way to do it, still it was one of the most divisive times in Israeli history. And then this thing happened, and everybody's rushing to defend Israel. People coming in from abroad to come and defend this land of ours. But at the same time, that forced us to cover up all this stuff that we had been dealing with in order to survive. And it doesn't go away just because of such a terrible terror attack that we experienced. And imagine the changes that 9/11 did, not on the world, but that it did on the United States. And, reflect that onto Israel and what could happen here in the next few years. So I really feel like we're not only dealing with things right now, okay, and we're only 10 days since these terror attacks. I'll be going into what's happening today. Part of this podcast is going to be some form of like a journal, an audio journal, a video journal of what it is that is happening here. So you're going to discover with me over the course of this podcast what unfolded in Israel. But I also think that we're at a pivotal moment, not only of the Jewish people of Israel. I think that it's a pivotal moment in history in general, and it's because both the Jews are still in diaspora, still in many Western countries, and are experiencing the ripples of what happens over here. And at the same time, the world is looking here because Israel is a center of a lot of political interests, right? We are in the Middle East, a lot of Arab countries around us. We have peace with some of them. We were negotiating peace with some others. We have the enmity with Iran, and Iran is linked with Russia through the Ukraine war. So this is another front of the West versus the East. So really, I mean, not to be flippant about it, definitely not in light of the horrible things that happened, but if World War III happens, this is where it's going to start, or this will be not the start, but this will be the official trigger. So I really, of course, hope that that's not what happens, and that we're able to keep some sort of a lid on this thing. But I really feel that this period needs to be told. The story needs to be told, and a wise professor once told me that he discovered that he was wiser across periods of time much more than he was at any given point in time in his life. And I think it wouldn't just be a waste or a shame. It would be really criminal to not make note of how things evolve here. So yeah, I'm joining hundreds, thousands of podcasters talking about this topic. But this series, this podcast, whatever I'll call it in the end, is going to be all about what happens in the next few weeks. Through it, if you're wondering what you're going to discover or hear about, you're going to hear about both the current events as I experience them. I am not a reporter. I'm not an expert on foreign affairs. I am just a guy going through this in Israel. I'll tell you all about that experience if you're interested in hearing. And as a result of that, you'll also get to know what it's like to live in Israel under these conditions. What is it like to live in Israel, to be a Jew in Israel in general? How do we look at the world? How do we experience it? You'll discover that Israelis are not all made of one cloth. There's different, colors and opinions and perspectives. Some of these perspectives right now are going through, tremendous vindication. Others are going through tremendous revolution and change. So hopefully by the time you finish listening to this, I really hope that, the casualties and the war that will go on will allow us to also talk about additional things. So that's what this is about. But I guess foremost is what I said at the beginning. This is my attempt at processing what's going on here. And I thank you for joining me on this journey. I guess one more thing to mention about this is that I'm not intending to bring here, at least the atrocities that were done by Hamas a week and a half ago. Not because those atrocities don't need to be mentioned or listed, but the internet is aflood with them. And it's painful for me to talk about the details of those things. I'm sure you can find it out. I'm sure you can I'm sorry if I'm not finding the right words right away, but hopefully you'll bear with me. Anyway, I hope you're able to sort of find the truth behind all the lies, the fake news, the misinformation, etc. And figure out for yourself what you think is happening, what not. I'm going to tell you the story from my perspective, and I'll try to be as level-headed as possible given what is happening out there. Okay? So maybe I'll tell you a little bit about myself, and then we'll tell you a little bit of what's happening out there today. So first of all, me. My name is Elisha Rosenzweig, and I was born in Israel, but my parents came from America, hence the relatively native accent. People tell me sometimes that they can't really place it But my parents were from New York. My father was originally from Canada, from Toronto, but later he lived in New York. So I'm guessing I have something akin to a New York accent. I grew up here. My parents moved here in 1975, I believe, and I was born in 1977. And I lived here all my life. Served in the IDF in a artillery unit, then went on to at the university. I'm also religious, Orthodox religious, so I also went to study in what's called a yeshiva, and went on to university, got my bachelor's and my master's in computer science in Israeli universities, and then got my PhD in UMass Amherst, where we stayed for 4 years, and we lived in Connecticut, and I studied in Amherst. So I'm mentioning all that background just for you to understand sort of what I've seen, right? So I've lived in America for 4 years in the East Coast, and I've always been very fascinated with the U.S., and especially in my years there, I was really soaking up a lot of the culture and the political climate, let's say. So hopefully that will also help me give you good reference points. They're not too Israeli centered in some cases. Anyway, I've lived here since then. I'm married, living in the center of Israel. I have 4 kids, and a PhD in computer science. I've been in high tech for the past decade or so, and I guess that's it. Also married, have a dog, and as we go, you'll learn more about me. And I guess next we should talk a little bit about what it is that's going on here. Right, so I'll tell you a little bit about what it was to discover what was going on. So this attack happened on October 7th. October 7th is the anniversary, the 50th anniversary for what's called the Yom Kippur War. The Yom Kippur War happened in 1973. It was a surprise attack by the Egyptians and the Syrians that attacked. Egypt is south of Israel, Syria is north of Israel, and they attacked us. First Syria, then Egypt joined, and tried to take over at least the land that we had conquered in 67 from them, and possibly even go further. That attack, we were able to beat it back, and since then, whenever we come up to Yom Kippur, so there's a constant regurgitation, let's say, or by the media of the things that happened then. Why was it such a central moment? Because of 2 things. First of all, Yom Kippur is the holiest day in the year of the Jewish people, and as a result of that, and specifically that day is a day of remorse and taking ownership and saying sorry. So the media loves to sort of jump on that and talk about how the fact that we were victims of a surprise attack is like one of these things that the government always has to be reminded that they owe us an apology for not having foreseen it. You'll see that this connection to Yom Kippur War is going to be very important for some of the immediate connotations that Jews have in Israel when they think about the latest attacks. Anyway, October 7th was not Yom Kippur this year. You have to remember that the Israeli calendar, the Jewish calendar, and the standard calendar, right, the Gregorian calendar, or whatever you call it, are not the same calendar. The Jewish calendar is a lunar calendar. It has 354 days, and the regular calendar has 365 days. There's an 11-day difference, and in Judaism we have this thing called Ibur, where we basically every few years reset the lunar calendar by adding an extra month, so that we are more or less always in sync, but always a little bit off. This year, October 7th was not Yom Kippur, but rather a holiday that takes place about 12 days later. The holiday of Simchat Torah, the holiday in which we celebrate the finishing of reading the what's called the Old Testament. Basically, every Sabbath we read a section of the Old Testament in the synagogue, and then once a year we celebrate the cycle that we had finished, because we finish it once a year. in a communal fashion. So it was a festival, and it also was a Saturday. So as Orthodox Jews, me and my family weren't connected to the television, weren't connected to the radio, not to the internet, not to anything. But we were woken up in the morning at 6 o'clock and ran to the safe room. Actually, what you see here, this is my safe room. It's also my office. So I'm not in here because of any specific attack right now, but this is also where I happen to have my office. Many, many Israeli houses have safe rooms because the missile issue is just a constant threat, and it has been for years. So, I mean, my building was built like 20 years ago. Okay, just for you to understand how much of a standard it is for Jews in Israel to assume that they might need a safe room. Yeah. So anyway, so we got up, we ran in here, stayed in here for a few minutes. The general guidelines are you have to stay in for 10 minutes after an alarm, after a siren, and then you can know that you're safe. That most likely whatever was fired that triggered this alarm is no longer a threat. And so then we went back to bed, a little bit shaken up, but these alarms have happened many times before over the course of the years. So while they did shake us up, we figured, okay, it was probably a random shooting and nothing major. But then in the morning, when I got to synagogue, I sort of approached people and asked them what was going on. By now, again, you have to understand, I mean, I'm assuming none of you, but those of you at least in America, have never had to experience a sort of a rude awakening, right? Because somebody's shooting missiles at you. But for us, it's already normal. So I walk up to somebody and I say, what do you think is happening? And he said, it's war. And then I began hearing rumors. Now, the way you hear rumors when you're an Orthodox Jew and you can't listen to the radio or watch television, internet, etc., is you happen to meet secular people that live in your building, that live down your street, and you start hearing rumors, and then it spreads. And we understood that something really bad was happening, that there was a breach at the border, that certain cities had people that had terrorists that infiltrated them, and there may have been also some people that were kidnapped and that were held hostage. In our wildest dreams, we did not imagine how bad it was. Okay, we understood that it was bad. It sounded like it was the worst thing that had happened in a long time. You have to understand that, let's say I grew up when I was like in the 90s, so we had suicide bombers that were going to buses and exploding and killing 20 people at a time. That was pretty bad, right? You didn't know if you'd go on a bus, if you'd come out alive. I mean, terrorism works via fear, right? It's not that it was happening every day to all the buses, but it's enough for you to know that that's a possibility, and already, your whole mentality shifts towards, detecting danger. And still, the worst fear you had was the case of kidnapped people, because Israel is very, very sensitive to hostages. And the last time we had this was with a soldier called Gilad Shalit years ago, who was captured as part of his army duty. And then when we finally released him, he was released in return for 1,000 terrorists that we had released. Some heavy terrorists that have killed again many times, some lighter terrorists, but 1,000. So the thought that there were more hostages and that this situation would be complicated and not just be an attack with maybe people that were hurt, which would have been terrible enough, was already pretty bad. And as the day went on, we understood that not only were people hurt, but that it was ongoing, that it wasn't over. And basically this thing that started at around 6 in the morning in the south continued for 36 hours until everything was back to more or less the way it was before in terms of our general security. Okay, again, I'm not going into the details and into the gory details of what they did, but you have to understand that over the course of these 36 hours, the Israeli special forces and the different security units in the in the towns along the border, killed 1,500 at least. I think between 1,000 and 1,500 Hamas terrorists that entered the border. So just imagine what that means. It's not one suicide bomber, and it's not a group of 10 people with Kalashnikovs, shooting around and killing maybe a dozen people. There were 1,500 terrorists over there, and that's why it took so long to sterilize, or whatever we call it, whatever sterilized language we use to taking out these guys, these terrorists. So it wasn't just it was a different feeling, okay? It was a real shock to everybody in the country, because not only were we surprised, and that in and of itself, is not something we're used to. Israel has a famed high quality intelligence, unit or units, and usually we're several steps ahead of Hamas. Just to give you an example, a few years ago, we blew up the entire or a huge section of the Hamas underground tunnel system that they had built. We just destroyed it in one shot. It was pretty fascinating. And that's just one example. Israel has a lot of good intelligence usually on Hamas. So not only were we surprised, but the degree of the surprise was like how big this operation was. And even worse was, it was the first time in living memory that Israel's borders were breached to this degree. Okay? That was scary. I live in the center of Israel, so this is, dozens of kilometers away from any of this action, other than the missiles. And still, the moment you feel that somebody is breaching your, we don't have a lot of additional layers of defense. Israel is a very small country, size of New Jersey, people tell me, and there is no security perimeter. The U.S. has the ocean, more or less, that separates them from most threats that they have, but you see what happens, let's say, in the southern border of the U.S., where the moment somebody's in, they're in, right? There's very little to stop them once they're in from moving forward into the country, and that's how Israel is too. We have towns and settlements that are very close, a kilometer, 2 kilometers from the border, and now you have 1,500 terrorists and civilians from Gaza also coming in and attacking and killing people. And nobody knows how many there are, right? Again, we didn't know also because it was Sabbath, but people didn't know. The person on the street didn't know, and our army was still sort of taken by surprise. So even they didn't know. We'll get to why they were taken by surprise maybe later. But it was really, really shocking, and it really it shook some sort of sense of security that we all have, and the fact that our borders are impregnable and that we're not exposed. One of the amazing miracles of Israel is this sense of security. Okay, small country, a lot of pretty terrible things sometimes happen in our vicinity, and yet people feel safe for the most part. You're going to learn a lot about the Israeli psyche as we go along here. But so in addition to the surprise, and in addition to the size of this operation, and in addition to that, we also had the sense of our borders aren't secure, and who knows what's coming next, how vulnerable we are. Who knows if there's additional terrorists that have just escaped from this from the attempt to catch them down south, and they're heading their way here, and maybe heading here, and maybe they'll show up in my doorstep. So yeah, that was tough. So that was the first few days. I'd say everybody was in a complete shock. Since then, I'll say, a lot of things have happened, but one of the things that's happened is that we understand better what had happened down in the border, and I'll try and give you some updates on that maybe in the next episode of this. I just want to segment these talks into chapters that you can listen to in a reasonable amount of time. But what we do know by now is that the army was responding. The army was taken by surprise, and we still don't know why it was so surprised and what failed in our intelligence system. But we do know that the special units, well, I'll say one thing is we also know that one of the first things that Hamas did was attack the local central command of that area of the army and take it over. So basically, they were able to, again, Israel is a small country. The central command for protecting that area is itself close to the border. So the Hamas had targeted that area and took it over. Remember, this is a Saturday during a holiday. A lot of people are on vacation. Israel's army is not a huge army in the, like, sort of like, the regular army. We have a lot of reserve that we can call upon. Right now, you'll hear numbers like 350,000 people that were called up for reserves. But, and for a country that's like, 8 million, that's, or 7 million, I'm not sure how many people we are, that's still a very large number, right? Let's say 7 million, we're talking about 5% of the country is now in reserve duty. That's a huge amount of people. But the usual soldiers, like, a lot of them were just, off at home, relaxing as part of their weekend. So, this goes back again to the issue of intelligence, right? We obviously did not know that this was going to happen. Maybe in future episodes I'll refer to some of the conspiracy theories around this, and we'll see, like, what's reasonable there, about why Israel didn't know. But that is the bottom line. We did not know, or at least we didn't behave like we knew. Okay, like, for those of you who want to keep the conspiracy theory alive, we'll get to that maybe in a later episode. But anyway, conspiracy or no, the first thing that the Hamas did was take over that base, and that meant that a lot of the ability to coordinate a counteroffensive was hobbled. A lot of the eyes and ears that we have and managed through there, they had cut off. So we also were lacking information, and it took a while for the special forces to come and start, just figuring out on the ground what was going on and start killing terrorists. But it was too late. I mean, obviously they saved many, many lives, but whatever we didn't save was horrendous, right? So we have over 1,000 dead, etc., and we have like 200 people that have been abducted. We don't know if they're alive. But at least it's comforting to know that there was a reaction, that the army wasn't just like sitting there for hours on end doing nothing and frozen, out of fear. They were doing what they could, and hopefully we learn our lesson from this. There'll definitely be a lot of reckoning at the end of this thing. So the first few days were just a sense of urgency. So everybody, now Israel has a very, like, you have to understand the Israeli story, right? We had no country for 2,000 years. We came here, and this is the one place that's going to save us from anti-Semitism and from all sorts of other terrible things that can happen to a people that is so small, right? Just 7 million people in Israel, or 9 million people out of the whole world. And everybody, and we also have like mandatory conscription. So that means we have, like, everybody has to be in the army. It's not a choice. It's not something you can just say, I don't want to go. Some people don't go. Ultra-Orthodox don't go, but we'll talk about that maybe some other time, because there's going to be big tectonic shifts there too. I'm quite sure already we can see it about them not joining the army. And so almost everybody has somebody in the army that they know. Okay, it's not like in the US or other countries where the army is a professional army and only a small segment of the population is part of it. When I was in America, I was always shocked that Memorial Day, the day in which you're supposed to commemorate your fallen soldiers, was a shopping day. That is, for an Israeli and for a Jewish Israeli, that is a complete anathema that doesn't compile. Okay, we have Memorial Day in Israel, and it's a very solemn day with a lot of showing respect to the soldiers, and because everybody has somebody that they know or in their family that was killed. My wife's cousin was killed in the Lebanese war in 1981. In 1980, no, not. I'm sorry, I'm messing that up. 1 second over here. Yeah, sorry about that. Yeah, sorry. My wife's cousin wasn't in 1981. It was later, 1982 was the war, but he was killed later in the aftermath of that war, several years later. Won't go into it right now. So the point is that everybody knows somebody in the army, okay? And once we understood how horrible what had happened was, once we understood the danger we were in, it was clear that the army would have to be called up and in full force. The civilian side of the population also went into action, okay? Because, I have a brother that's in the army now. I have many cousins that are in the army. My wife has a bunch of cousins in the army. I know friends who are in the army, coworkers, etc. And everybody knows somebody and understands that this is a fight for our survival. I'll get to that maybe in a later episode as to why that is. But so the first thing you start doing is you start, thinking, how can I help? Right? I have a brother who's there. How can I help him? So people buy food and they go up to the army bases because everybody knows where there's army bases, and they go to the army bases and they give their relatives food and they buy, the army didn't supply you with a good jacket. Okay, I'll get you a jacket. I'll get your whole platoon jackets, right? Really, people there was a huge outpour of support for the soldiers, and just the feeling of, we're fighting for our survival. We have to do whatever we can. People began organizing dozens of, civilian efforts to help the people that had lost loved ones. There were small, towns that had lost a third of their population. A third, okay? 100 people out of 300 in this kibbutz, were murdered. Some of them, their livelihoods have been destroyed. Some of them, it's just a huge emotional, asteroid that just struck them. So, how to support them. There's, really dozens of efforts, people cooking food for them and finding houses for them while, the area is cleared from not just the terrorists, but from, the bodies of their fallen friends and family. Just an amazing, outpouring. And as I mentioned at the beginning, there's this big political, fight going on in Israel. It's big. I'll tell you more about it in future episodes. But, and all that just washed away for the first few days. People very angry, feeling, at the beginning that we didn't know how much the army had done. And still we feel angry at the army and at the political class that, didn't make sure that this didn't happen. That's what they're there for, to prevent exactly this kind of thing. But first and foremost, let's take care of the people that were hurt, and let's take care of the soldiers. So that was last week. Last week was, really, it felt like a year had passed. As we were discovering more and more what had happened. And then you see the Hamas posting the videos of what they had done. And then you see these, on the one hand, a lot of Western countries, their governments were supporting Israel, but all these rallies in the street of Palestinian Hamas supporters, and supporting what they did, not sugarcoating it, but supporting going in and killing civilians, women, children. You have to remember, it's not even just like it would be enough if they targeted Jews for being Jews. They killed whoever they saw. They didn't care. Okay, there were Thailand. Israel has a lot of foreign workers that come to Israel for a temporary amount of time, and then they leave, from all sorts of third world countries. So there were places that had Thailand workers that were there. They just gunned down a dozen Thailandish workers just because they happened to be there. And then they pride themselves on this and just post their GoPro video feed out there. Obviously, they're doing it to try and show off their amazing, endeavors, and to strike fear in our hearts, right? To show how strong they are and how, all powerful they are. But think what it takes, to be a person who does that. What kind of a person, what kind of a culture, has to be in order to do that kind of thing. Yeah. So you start to process, what happened, and you realize that the world is never going to be the same. And I'll tell you now at a high level why the world won't be the same. And we'll go into more detail in future videos. And I'm sorry I keep on saying that. As I'm talking, I'm processing. So I'm sort of making mental notes for the kinds of things I need to share so that you can understand the full picture here. It's not going to be the same because of a few things. The first thing is that, I'd say the main one is that they broadcast this on YouTube, on TikTok, on whatever platform they wanted to, and show the world what they really want to do. Usually when there are rockets fired, it doesn't, photographically, it doesn't, I think, shock people into understanding what it's like. To be fired on rockets is not pleasant. It's pretty scary. But if you think about it from in the visual medium, it's very hard to see who's firing on who and who's good or bad, and people get used to things, in the international community, and that's even before I go into historical anti-Semitism, etc. But when you see pictures of what they did, you see this barbarism. You understand that this is telling everybody what they really want to do and what is really happening in their minds and their souls on the other side of the border. I think it's impossible to look away, and I think the fact that even that you had people celebrating in the West is itself, a shock to a lot of people in the West, rightfully so. It's been growing under their noses for a long time, but still, I think it's a shock. I think we like, Ben Shapiro made this point. I think we like to believe that everybody is like us, to have the same value system overall. And then you see people celebrating this and you understand that they don't. But even not just worldwide, I think in Israel, that's itself going to be a huge thing, because there is a left wing in Israel, and the left wing has always said that they want to have peace. And, the basic assumption under the idea of peace is that there's somebody to make peace with, right? That person also wants peace. You just need to find a way to talk to them. There probably are people in Gaza that you can make peace with, but they're not in power. They are not, the Hamas, which is in power, is not a partner for peace, clearly. Not after you do this. Not when you send people in to gun down civilians that are no threat to you, have no military significance other than to cast terror. And at the same time, so that's like sort of the shock on the left. Okay, the shock on the left is that the entire assumption for their worldview is being shattered. Again, the human mind is very, very creative. People can come up with ways to salvage whatever they want, but you can already see it online that many of them are saying, that's it, we're done. We don't believe in any kind of reconciliation in this generation. And that's going to have political ramifications, moving forward, and the kind of things, the kind of unity we're going to have in the country surrounding certain policies that before were very contentious. There'll be a shift there to the right in terms of what we see. And at the same time, the people in power happen to be the most right-wing government that we've had in a very, very long time. It's a long story as to why that is, but it's a right-wing government, and the person leading them is Bibi Netanyahu, who's been in power for a very long time. So he can't even say, oh, it's not my fault, it's my predecessor's fault, or whatever. He's been in power on and off, but more or less straight for the past 12 years. So it's really, he and his party, have been in power, and there's no way around it. I mean, this is a colossal failure. It's true it's the army, but but in the end, people that manage the army and decide what to do with it are the political class, and they have failed, and they'll have to pay. Now, you never know who's going to pay, how they'll pay. Obviously, the outcome of this war will make a big difference, but there's a very, very strong feeling, even among the right, that Netanyahu, who's been a very popular president in the right for many years, is going to have to go. Again, in the end, elections are elections. George Bush was elected even after 9/11, and it could very well be that the same will be here for Bibi. And I'm not here in this podcast to take sides on that topic. It's really not that interesting for me at the moment. Time will tell. We'll see what people do. We'll make decisions. But that's a shock on the right, that the right-wing government failed when it should have been more alert, more careful, more, let's say, for lack of a better word, militant vis-a-vis Hamas, and wasn't. And so the people, not the ideology, but the people there have failed us, and they were in power. So this, leaves an opening for the left to take over. But that's the thing. People will want probably will be more right-wing in their opinions, but will want the people on the right to lead them. So it's going to lead to a lot of interesting things in the future. But that's way down the line. Nobody really knows what the future is going to be like. And I guess I'll end up just with a summary of what's happening right now. So we're 10 days into this thing. We have the army waiting. We are focused on what's happening down south, but in the north we have Hezbollah, which is a terrorist organization that basically controls Lebanon, even though they weren't voted to control Lebanon. They're not an official army, but they're stronger than the Lebanese army. So they basically control what happens there. And so far they've just been, firing here and there, and some soldiers have died, but you can call it the, virtue signaling version of warfare. They haven't actually unleashed. They have much more firepower than Hamas does down south. They haven't done anything with that. It's either a technique for them to just keep a lot of our forces up north, because we do have, I don't know the numbers, but a large number of our soldiers is up north, not down south. And that's because they're sort of forcing us to split our forces so that they can't make a surprise attack in the north. And that may be the whole point of that virtue signaling. And I definitely hope that they do not join the battle. Even though Israel could handle that, it would just mean more casualties and prolong what's going on here and risk even further escalation. And by the way, if you're wondering why America sent its aircraft carrier, it's for that purpose. It's not to help us with Hamas, it's to deter the Hezbollah from taking any kind of action, as well as trying to wait for the moment that they're going to basically move in for the first time since we left in 2008, I think, in the disengagement plan. Israel's going to move full force into the Gaza Strip and dismantle the Hamas military operation for sure, and hopefully also, for me, kill their military elite and prevent them from being able to do anything like this for the next several decades. Really, completely raise the Hamas operation down to the ground. As part of this, Israel is also trying to do something extremely humane in the context of this war, which is to say we're going to encourage the Palestinian people to leave the area. We're not going to just say, as far as I know, and again, I may be wrong about this, but as far as I know, if you decide to take refuge during a war, if you're a country and you use civilians as your shield, you are the one who is violating the Geneva Convention, not the person who attacks you, because you chose to be in the civilian area and hide all your weapons there. And while Hamas is not officially a country, for all intents and purposes, it controls that area. And so, at least from a moral standpoint, if not a legal one, Israel would be completely in its right to say, Well, if you, it's it's you're the one putting them in danger. You're responsible. But still, we don't want to kill innocent civilians as much as we can, and therefore, as well as encourage people to leave the north of Gaza and move south. And that way they can walk into the north and mainly face combatants as much as possible. Hamas on their side are actually stopping people from going south because they want the human shields. So we'll see what happens with that. And once it's ready, it could be tonight, it could be even happening right now. I don't know. I'm telling you again, this is October 16th. If by the time you listen to this, something has happened, I apologize for the misinformation or from mainly it's not being fully updated, up to date about what's happening. So we're waiting to see. And hopefully, when what happens, it wouldn't be realistic to say, I hope nobody gets hurt or whatever, because people will get hurt. People that don't deserve to will get hurt. And hopefully, mostly, people that do deserve to, people that went ahead and killed 1,000 and something civilians for nothing, other than just being there. People that, kidnapped hostages and tormented babies and all this stuff will pay the price. And most importantly, I hope that whatever we do there really leads to a deep ripple effect in the regional politics that prevents the need for these things. Remember, people that live in Gaza chose the Hamas. They support the Hamas. They haven't had an election in a long time, but every survey that's done shows that they support the Hamas over 50%. And we call them innocent civilians, and in many ways they are. They're just people living there under the rule of these terrorists. But there are 2 million people there. They could rise up against them, and some of them would die, but they would be free. And when you don't do that, you also bear some responsibility for what your leaders do in your name. Not to mention the fact that we have video showing them celebrating in the streets with people mutilated, being driven around on jeeps, and pickup trucks. So, I'm not saying that a person who celebrates a serial killer's murders is himself a murderer, but I don't think that he's really fully innocent. It's a dicey issue. Anyway, so that will be it for now. I will be doing another one over the next few days. I'll give you both updates and a bit more context for the political situation, the security situation. And I hope that this helps you sort of get a picture for what is happening here. How do Israelis think about things? I will try to present to you how different people think about it, not just my opinion, but people on the far right, far left, things that I pick up. And I hope in the end for you to have a balanced view of what is happening here. Anyway, thank you for listening. I'd be happy to hear your comments. And until next time, be safe, and may we have peace and safety sooner rather than later. Please God. Good night.